Hey, what's going on everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at the all-new Steam Deck OLED. On the channel, we did take a first look at the OLED model, but since then, I've had about a week to spend with this, and I can honestly say that, Valve did a bang-up job on this one. It's definitely the best Steam Deck on the market right now, and in this video, I kind of wanted to give you all of my thoughts, things that I've found. I've done some battery life testing, some performance testing here. And by the end of this video, hopefully you have a better idea of if this is something you should pick up, whether you upgrade from the LCD. If you don't have a Steam Deck at all right now, should you go with this or maybe something else? Got a lot of stuff to go over here, but the first thing I noticed when I took this out of the box, and I even mentioned it in my first look video, is the weight difference. On paper, it doesn't look like much of a difference because the LCD Steam Deck is coming in at 669 grams and the OLED Steam Deck is 640. Making the OLED version only 29 grams lighter than the LCD version. But if you're used to holding on to that Steam Deck and you move over to the OLED, you'll definitely be able to tell the difference. The next major thing I noticed, and really the claim to fame to this version here, was the display. I mean, how beautiful it really is. It's an OLED coming in at 7.4 inches, same resolution, 800p, but it is running it up to 90 Hz. And taking a look at it in videos and pictures really doesn't do it justice. We have some amazing viewing angles here with the new OLED model, plus it supports HDR, which is something we will get into in a second. Some people can live without it, including myself, but it does make a difference in a lot of games that support HDR, and the game will need to support HDR in order for it to work. Aside from this new display and the weight, there are quite a few other differences here. So we're actually working with the same APU, but they shrunk the die. Instead of it being a 7nm chip, it's now a 6nm chip. And this doesn't mean you're going to get better performance, but it should be more energy efficient. And yeah, it definitely is. We still have 16 gigabytes of RAM, but they've upped that speed. It's now LPDDR5 at 6400 megatransfers per second, as opposed to 5500. That 7.4-inch OLED display up to 90 Hz. You can pick this up with either a 512GB M.2 SSD or a 1TB straight from the factory now. We also have Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.3. The older LCD model only had Wi-Fi 5. It also has a larger battery, coming in at 50 watt-hours as opposed to 45. And the fact that this is a more energy-efficient screen and APU means that we can actually get much better battery life out of the new OLED Steam Deck. Now, of course, there's not a lot of newer AAA games that we're going to be running at 90 FPS on the Steam Deck, but when it comes to indie games and older Source titles or just older PC games in general, yeah, this screen really does make a difference. Plus, with this new screen, we have more refresh rates that we can work with, so we can really dial this in per game. And this is really going to help out with people who like to tweak and tune their settings for better battery life or just kind of all-out FPS. And it really can't be stated enough, but this OLED display is absolutely beautiful. One of the best displays that we've seen in a handheld so far. Vibrant colors, really deep blacks, and overall I think they did a great job choosing this one. And it supports HDR. So a lot of the games that do support HDR will default to it on. It kind of detects the screen supports it. So something like Mortal Kombat 1 will default to HDR on. But with Cyberpunk 2077, that is something we'll need to enable. And I'm just going to go with HDR sRGB. I think this one looks a little better. If you do get your hands on one, there's two options here in Cyberpunk 2077, so you can kind of choose which one you like more. Now we also have a little indicator. If we open up our performance menu, we can actually see that this is an HDR enabled game, and we've got HDR on right now with Cyberpunk 2077. In SDR mode, the brightness of this screen reaches 600 nits, but in HDR mode, it can reach up to 1000 nits of brightness. Keep in mind, the LCD Steam Deck had a maximum brightness of 400 nits. So even in SDR mode, we've got a much brighter display, and it's really hard to tell on camera. It doesn't matter what camera you use. Unless you see this with your naked eye, HDR isn't going to look as good as it does in real life. But luckily, they did give us an HDR visualizer. So from display, we've got a few to choose from, but I'm going to go with the waveform version. And once we get back into the game, it'll show us exactly what's going on with HDR here. And yeah, a game like Cyberpunk 2077 with all the bright lights, bright colors, especially at night, it makes a huge difference going from SDR to HDR on a good display. And with this, I wanted to show you a little bit of a comparison here. So we're just going to kind of focus in on one spot. I'll enable HDR and then turn it back off. Just standing in the same spot here, we've got HDR on. We'll go ahead and make sure it's off. As you can see, kind of dims everything up. HDR on, HDR off. And we've got another spot here kind of looking out the window. With those bright lights in the background, it really makes a difference. So HDR on, HDR off. And you can see those colors and everything are just so much brighter. Like I said, this will do up to 1,000 nits of brightness with HDR on. And with something like Mortal Kombat 1, it makes a huge difference. We've got all of those particles when we're fighting, all that background kind of shining in. It's really awesome to see HDR on a handheld like this and kind of implement it in a really good way because we've got that OLED display. And remember, we've got a much higher refresh rate. Here's Forza Horizon 5 at 90 FPS. Low settings, a little bit of FSR. We get some dips every once in a while, and that's kind of how it is. You could take FSR to performance, but it will degrade that picture quality by quite a bit. But I think we're close enough, and I've only got FSR set to balanced. Taking the refresh rate up to 90 with games that'll support it really smooths everything out. And on the LCD Steam Deck, we can run the game at this kind of frame rate, but we're not going to get that lock on the refresh rate with the display, which really does make it nice and buttery. I also wanted to give you a look at Spider-Man Remastered running here. Keep in mind, Miles Morales is going to perform about the same. Now we can't quite get a steady 60 with this new OLED Steam Deck, but it's pretty close, and you know, locking this down at 45 is probably the way to go. And another thing I definitely wanted to talk about here was emulation. We've got some GameCube using the Dolphin emulator. And when it comes to emulation on the OLED versus the LCD, you're basically going to see the same kind of performance across the board. We're not working with a more powerful chip here, it's just a more efficient chip and a much better screen, which does draw a lot less power. So you can get much better battery life while emulating your favorite games on the OLED. And speaking of battery life, I've been running a lot of tests on the OLED versus the LCD. And worst case scenario here, the OLED Steam Deck is going to pull 23.7 watts from the battery. That's in total. I've got the screen brightness at 100%, volume at 100%, and we've got Cyberpunk 2077 running here with an uncapped frame rate. And just to give you an idea here, on the LCD Steam Deck, we're pulling 27.2. I see it drop down to around 26.3. Same location, same settings, Cyberpunk 2077, uncapped frame rate, screen brightness at 100%. So overall, the OLED version is more efficient, plus we've got a bigger battery, coming in at 50 watt hours as opposed to the LCD's 45. And through all of my tests so far, battery life is actually looking pretty good. So for all three of these, I use Cyberpunk 2077 with an uncapped FPS, screen brightness at 100%, and at 5 watts, we're drawing a total of 9.7 watts from the battery, averaged 309 minutes. At a 10 watt TDP, we had a total draw of 16.3 watts from the battery, got around 179 minutes. And at 15 watts, it's drawn a total of 23.4 watts from the battery. And that netted me 130 minutes of runtime out of the OLED Steam Deck. And this is worst case scenario. We're using Cyberpunk 2077, so that CPU and GPU is going to pull as much as it can from whatever given wattage that we've thrown at it. But either way you look at it, the Steam Deck OLED can get 2 hours of runtime with it totally maxed out and that screen brightness at 100%. Going into something a bit easier to run with no pre-designated TDP can net you a lot more runtime. For instance, here we have some GameCube emulation, one of my favorite games, Automodelista. From the battery, we're only pulling 8.3 watts, seen it jump up to around 8.4. This will be coming in really close to getting 6 hours of runtime out of this 50 watt hour battery. And we can get even more with something easier to emulate, like Game Boy. We're pulling 5.6 watts from the battery. With this, we could get close to 9 hours of runtime out of the Steam Deck OLED. So Valve has managed to make this version of the Steam Deck even more efficient, but what about more powerful? Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, we've basically got the same APU, they've just shrunk that die. Now, where performance could definitely come into play here is that faster RAM. After all, since we're working with an APU, we will use that system RAM as VRAM, and theoretically, faster we can get that, better performance we can get out of the iGPU. And I did go through and run some benchmarks on the OLED and the LCD version using the same exact settings. Horizon Zero Dawn 800p low settings with some FSR on the OLED netted us 76 with that built-in benchmark, and on the LCD version of the Steam Deck, we got 73 FPS. The next game I tested was Forza Horizon 5 800p low settings with some FSR. On the OLED, we actually got an average of 74 FPS. On the LCD Steam Deck, 69. I will admit, the LCD did come out with a much funner number, but the OLED beat it out here, and I think this is really coming down to that faster RAM. It's not much at all, and it might not be noticeable to many people out there, but we need to squeeze as much as we can out of these devices because we're not working with much performance in the first place. And the final game I tested was Cyberpunk 2077 using the Steam Deck preset Uncapped FPS. On the OLED, 49 FPS. On the LCD, 46. I'm actually going to call that 47. We're so close there. So with everything I've tested so far here, it looks like we're getting around a 3 FPS increase on average, which really isn't that much, and some games may not benefit at all. Some games may be able to use that faster RAM much better than these that we tested, so we could see a little more of a performance jump over the LCD. So yeah, we've got newer hardware here with the Steam Deck OLED, and I think that Valve has done an amazing job with this one. Absolutely love the screen, awesome battery life, and fan noise has also been significantly reduced in the Steam Deck OLED. If you ask me, yeah, this is the best version of the Steam Deck so far, but should you upgrade from the LCD Steam Deck? Well, if you do upgrade, this is what you're going to get. Bigger, brighter, better screen, higher refresh rate, and it supports HDR. Better battery life, we've got that bigger battery, and it's more efficient due to that 6nm APU and the OLED display not pulling as much power. It is lighter, it's got a quieter fan, and you can actually opt to pick this up with a 1TB drive instead of just the maximum 512 in the LCD version. So these are definitely pros if you're going to be upgrading, and really the only downside here that I see is we didn't get a significant jump in performance because we've got that same APU. Of course, you may notice a little better performance in some games, and it's coming in at a higher price tag right now. Heading over to the Steam Deck product page, you can see that the 512GB OLED is coming in at $549. Now, another thing you're not getting here is that premium anti-glare etched glass. You'll have to opt for the 1TB OLED version for $649, and they're advertising this right beside the 256 LCD at $399. But if we go to the highest end model they offer for the LCD, 512GB of storage, and you get that premium anti-glare glass. So there is a $100 difference between the 512 OLED model and the top of the line LCD model. In my opinion, if you're in the market for a Steam Deck right now, I would skip the LCD, go straight for that OLED. But if you've already got an LCD Steam Deck, the big deciding factor for you is how much do you use the Steam Deck right now? Have you been wanting better performance out of it? A lot of people definitely want a more powerful APU, and unfortunately with the OLED, we're not getting it. We are getting a plethora of new upgrades that are really awesome, but the main thing that I was really interested in was a nice performance jump, and unfortunately, we just don't have it. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. Really appreciate you watching. I will have more coming, so definitely stay tuned to the channel. It'd be pretty cool if you could hit that like button or think about subscribing so you know when I post the next one. And if you're interested in learning a little more or maybe picking up a Steam Deck OLED, I'll leave some links down below. But I'd love to know your thoughts on this new Steam Deck. Is this something you're picking up? Did you pre-order it when it went live? Did you go for the limited edition version? Because personally, I think that one looks really good. Let me know your thoughts down below. And like always, thanks for watching.